Hey everyone, it's Reilly with another all-English episode. I hope you enjoyed the last all-English episode with Josh as a guest, but unfortunately this time it's just me. So for this episode, Sota asked me to talk about the recent plane crashes that have been happening kind of around the world. I'm maybe going to focus mostly on plane crashes that happened in North America, because those are the ones that seem to come up on my news feed the most. But yeah, I'll try to talk about some other ones around the world as well, and then give kind of my feelings about them. But before that, I'll do the Instagrams. Mine is Reilly Sullivan XD, and Sota's is Eigo no Sota. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, yeah, so I think, at least for me, the first kind of airline crash that kind of started this news cycle where it seems like almost every crash that happens becomes a kind of big news story was the one that happened in South Korea. So that one was in Muon, South Korea, which I think is... So it's in like southwest Korea. But the plane was flying from Thailand, and it was a 737-800, which is, that's a big plane. 737-800 is the name of the airplane, or the type of airplane, right? And yeah, there were 181 people on board, and the plane... It seems, from the evidence that we have now, or the evidence that I've been able to find in my research, that there was a bird that struck one of the engines of the plane, and that caused it to kind of lose control as it was coming in for a landing. And it landed without its landing gear, without its wheels. It did what's called a belly landing. And then it crashed into a kind of structure at the end of the runway, and almost everyone on the plane lost their lives. I think 2 people survived with injuries. Yeah, so this was a pretty big news story. I mean, I guess it should be. Like, it's not very common, or it seems like it didn't used to be very common that commercial airlines would crash in such a kind of dramatic way. And yeah, since then, kind of plane crashes have been in the news a lot. I think especially in the U.S. So in the U.S., there was also a plane crash in Washington, D.C., where a Army helicopter crashed into a kind of smaller airplane in the air while that smaller airplane was kind of about to land at Reagan National Airport. And that one hits a little bit close to home for me because... Yeah, Reagan National Airport is the airport that I always flew out of. I grew up in Maryland, and Reagan was pretty much the closest airport to me. So yeah, whenever I flew to see my grandparents, or even later when I went to college in New York, whenever I would fly home from New York, I would fly to Reagan National, pretty much. There were a couple of other airports in the area, but I usually flew into Reagan National. And so, yeah, it's pretty easy to imagine that happening to me, I guess. Because I know that, I remember that kind of route where you're descending, you're going across the Potomac River and looking at the runway, which is, I imagine, what people on that airplane were doing before they were hit by the helicopter. And And yet in that one, 67 people lost their lives, which is the deadliest airline crash since 9/11, 2001. So that's a pretty big deal in the U.S. Obviously, it's not as big. I don't know. I don't. Maybe I shouldn't compare, but more people lost their lives in the South Korea air incident. But for me personally, the DC one is more kind of impactful just because of it feels close to home. It feels like something that could have happened to me or could have happened to my family or something like that. But yeah, I think some stuff about that DC crash that was weird is that the people flying the helicopter were flying with night vision goggles on. Those kind of goggles that show they let you see in the night, I guess, and they make everything green or whatever, or at least that's how they usually look in movies. I've never actually tried them. But then also there was some miscommunication with the air traffic control, with the tower at the airport that tells the different airplanes and helicopters and whatever what other craft are in the air and what to be careful for and what's happening and blah, 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 that kind of stuff. So apparently there was some kind of miscommunication with the helicopter and with that air traffic control. And then the two vehicles hit each other in the air. Then there was, I'm not actually sure of the chronology of this, of like what order they happened in. I'm just kind of thinking about them in my own memory of the events, so they could certainly be wrong. But the next one that I remember is a crash that happened in Philadelphia, another kind of close to home one for me because Yuki is from Philadelphia and she still has family there. This one was an air ambulance, so like a small kind of private jet that was taking a little girl who was sick and her family. I think they were flying out of a children's hospital in Philadelphia, and they didn't get very far away at all. I think a couple of miles, and then the plane crashed into like a pretty populated area in the city of Philadelphia, like near a mall, I think. I think all 6 people on the plane passed away, and one more person who was on the ground, as well as more than 20 people were injured. That one is kind of a weird situation because, you don't think of planes. I don't know. You don't think of like private planes crashing. No, that's a weird thing to say because I think they do crash more often. But it's just like an air ambulance is something that you would think would be safe. I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but you would hope that an ambulance, even if it's a flying one, would be safe, because it's protecting you or helping you with your illness or whatever's making you unhealthy. But then it crashed, which is, very tragic. And also this one had a lot of video of it because it happened, in a populated area. So there's a lot of like cell phone video of people seeing this airplane crash, or of it, certainly of like the kind of fires that happened after it had crashed. Then the next one, there was a crash in Toronto in Canada, where an airplane kind of flipped over so that it ended up, when it finally came to a stop after landing, if you can call it landing, it was upside down. And somehow in that crash, nobody lost their lives. I think that one, I didn't write down what kind of airplane that was, but I think it was another big one, like 737 size or something like that. But that one too, I think it maybe came down to the runway being icy, or I'm not exactly sure what caused it to flip over, but thankfully, luckily, nobody lost their life in that one. So yeah, those are the main ones that I want to talk about. I think there have been a few others in the U.S. where things happened with miscommunication between air traffic control. Or I've heard of several near misses where like one plane is about to land and another plane is getting ready to take off, and the landing plane has to pull back up suddenly because if it had landed, it would have hit the other plane, and like one of them was not properly listening to what was going on with air traffic control, what they were supposed to be doing. I've heard a few stories like that. So in terms of like what is actually wrong, what's going on with flight and the air travel industry, and like why does it seem like there are more crashes? It's a good question, and obviously I don't have the answer to it, but I can say that like so far in 2025, or at least between January and February, there have been 13 fatal plane crashes. That's a stat I saw online. I'm actually not sure if that's in the U.S. only or in the world. I think it might be U.S. only for that one, so maybe not as relevant for Japanese listeners. Sorry. So 13 in 2025, and in the same 2 months, there were 28 last year and 33 in 2022. So actually, the number of deadly plane crashes is going down, but I think the majority of these plane crashes are going to be like small private jets, because I think it's called like personal aviation or recreational aviation, which means like somebody has enough money to buy a small airplane, and so they fly it around for fun. I know in my hometown, there was a small airport that mostly took like private planes. And, some of them, I guess, when you talk about this kind of, these kind of airplanes, some of them are like private jets. So like you can imagine very rich people who fly them around instead of flying on, like Japan Airlines or whatever. But most of them are these kind of small, sometimes even propeller planes, like not even jets, that people just fly kind of for fun because it's something they like to do, instead of like actually using the airplane to go from one place to another. And I think in that situation, that's where flying a plane can be really dangerous, because a lot of times those people, they have a pilot's license, but they might not be as expert at flying an airplane as, someone who has been doing it for like 20 years for Japan Airlines or whatever, and flies like one of those big jets. So I think the numbers there, while it says like, oh, there's only been 13 plane crashes this year compared to 28 and 33 in the last 2 years, it's a little bit misleading because most of those air crashes will have low casualty numbers, meaning like not that many people lose their lives in each of those crashes because there's not that many people on the airplane, maybe one or two. But as I mentioned, that DC crash where 67 people died is the deadliest in 24 years. And then obviously the one in South Korea, it was extremely deadly as well. I imagine the deadliest in South Korea in a very long time too. Maybe ever, I don't know. So it's difficult to say like, oh, actually there's not as many crashes as there were, a couple years ago. But the difference is most people don't fly on those kind of small recreational airlines. Most people fly on the big ones like the Japan Airlines or American Airlines or whatever. And so maybe it seems like the danger for you or me could be going up if those kind of airlines are crashing now when it seemed like in the past they almost never did, right? So there is, for me at least, a feeling that maybe for me flying is getting more dangerous. It seems like planes that I could fly on could crash. And yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, but actually not so much for my sake. I think I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but my mom is a flight attendant and has been a flight attendant for my whole life. So she flies for American Airlines, and yeah, so she is on an airplane like half the time, basically. She usually flies international, so she'll fly from the East Coast where she lives. She'll fly from like New York to actually recently she's been flying to Haneda to Japan for some flights, and then she'll fly to like Europe every once in a while or whatever. But yeah, so these recent plane crashes have had me thinking like more than usual about whether my mom is safe flying all the time. But on the other hand, like I said, she's been a flight attendant my whole life, so I'm pretty used to her flying. And honestly, personally, I'm also a bit used to flying because she's a flight attendant. We used to fly a lot, like because flying was free for us. So for most vacations, we would fly. So I've probably been on like 100 airplanes or so in my life. So for me, flying itself is not such like a big deal, and nowadays I don't get scared when I get on airplanes. But these kind of recent crashes have at least made me think about it more than I used to. I used to get on a plane and not even really have that thought, oh, what if the plane crashes? Because I think most people, when they get into a car, they don't think, oh, what if the car crashes, right? What if a car crashes into me? Because you do it so often that it's just kind of a normal thing. And so for a while, for me, getting on an airplane was like that. But now, because of the news, I have been thinking about it more when my mom, is flying or whatever. So I think for the listeners out there, I think if you are somebody who is worried about flying, who gets nervous or scared on airplanes, I think that's something that is reasonable, because an airplane is like a non-normal thing. Most people don't fly on airplanes more than once or twice a year, I think. And it can be scary because it's like completely out of your control. Somebody else is flying the airplane and stuff like that. But I think it's also important to remember that even with these recent plane crashes, the actual danger of flying, of dying rather, in a plane crash is extremely low. I think in America, it's something like 1 in 11 million, your odds of like dying in a plane crash. Or rather, the amount of people who die in plane crashes or something is 1 out of every 11 million people in the U.S., while car accidents are 1 in 5,000. So, what does that mean? You're 2,000 times more likely to die in a car crash than you are in an airplane crash. I don't know if that actually makes flying on an airplane less scary, or if it makes driving a car scarier. Either way, just trying to put in perspective that flying on an airplane is much, much safer than being in a car or a bicycle. I think, even for that matter. I don't have the stat on that, but I think riding a bicycle like I do most of the time can be pretty dangerous. Mostly if you get hit by cars, but even if you fall down and hit your head or something like that. But anyway, not talking about bicycles today. Yeah, I think that's gonna do it for me. I hope, I don't know exactly what I hope. I hope people can fly on airplanes if they have to, with peace of mind. That even though there have been these crashes recently, I think that it's still safe to fly on an airplane. I think people shouldn't be too worried about that. Yeah, thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.